Hello and welcome to India Speak, a podcast by the Center for Policy Research. I'm Sushant Singh, Senior Fellow at CPR. In this series, we have been speaking to leading experts and academics on the many facets of Sino-India relations. The view of these bilateral ties is often articulated by Western academics besides Indian experts and practitioners. We hardly hear any authentic voices from China, from within that country, which matters, who can provide us their point of view. To rectify that and hear the Chinese view, we have today on our show Hu Shisheng, who is a senior research fellow and the director of the Institute for South Asian Studies at the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. Hu received his BA in Hindi and his MA in Sanskrit and Bali languages from Peking University. He did his PhD in international politics and relations with a focus on ethnic and religious issues from CICIR in 2006. In 2004, he was a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington. Hu's research areas include the political and security situations in India and Pakistan, ethnic and religious problems in South Asia, and the Tibet issue. Hu, welcome to India Speak.
Nice to have this chance. Yeah.
Thank you, Hu. Hu, in October 2020, you wrote a very, famous paper, renowned paper which has been quoted enough, titled "The Behavioral Logic Behind India's Tough Foreign Policy Towards China." In it, you highlighted the strange phenomena every year since Modi came to power, that there has been a benign beginning and said end to each of the years. Could you explain why you said that? The idea of absolute security, which breeds absolute insecurity in the other side, which you expounded upon. Why did you say that every year starts on a good note and ends on a bad note?
No, what I want to emphasize in my article is that this kind of fluctuation of bilateral relations go side by side with the seasonal changes along the frontier regions. So what I mean here is that the bilateral relations got a very visible impact from the border issues, because we know that when the spring is coming, when the snow is melting, then the patrolling of both sides, the security personalities will increase, will carry forward in a more regular way. Then they become much more easier to positively or sometimes negatively engage with each other. If they couldn't address their differences on the spot rationally, then they could lead to some physical conflicts, like what happened ever since 2013 each year. But when the winter is coming, then their patrolling be reduced or coming to a stop. Then there will be no such kind of physical conflicts along the frontier regions. Then the bilateral relations will normally coming down. Why this happened? Because of the mass media's coverage. The media hype about this kind of conflicts, exaggerating the damage, and also the politicians taking advantage of this, stirring up the feelings of each side, then making the policy decision makers have to more or less have to make some readjustment of their diplomatic activities or diplomatic interactions. This, of course, they will lead to the fluctuation of the bilateral relations. That is what I mean.
Yeah, but while this issue on the border, the differences on the border and the seasons on the border, the weather changing every single year, your paper seems to emphasize that things have somehow changed in the last few years since Mr. Modi became India's Prime Minister. Could you kindly explain that part?
That coincides with the infrastructure development in both sides. I know that when Modi came into power, the government is speeding up the frontier infrastructure works in a more dramatic way, in a more heavy way. While on the other side, that is on the Chinese side, we also developed into that kind of level that we came to building up our frontier infrastructure connectivities. The China's philosophy, while referring to the road building like this, first we're building a road along our coastal areas, the most economic developed area regions, and then we gradually to the hinterland of China, and then to the frontier provinces of China, and then to the frontier regions along the borders. Now we're just reaching to that kind of developmental level. That is, we're also emphasizing the border road networks construction. That this would provide some solid physical foundation for the security personalities to carry forward their patrolling along the border regions in a higher frequency. That means the frequency of engagement with patrolling soldiers will become more and more, how can I say, in a high frequency. Then they will naturally follow some conflicts if they cannot addressing their differences on the spot. That is what I mean.
In the paper, Hu, you also looked at the behavioral logic behind the clash between the two countries and the drivers of India's tough policy towards China, what you call is India's tough policy towards China. You said there's been some kind of economic decoupling. You spoke about heightened public opinion in India, which you just referred to. You also spoke about military aggression from India's side. You said there's a right-leaning tendency in India's politics, which is getting reflected in what's happening with China. And you also said that there's an attempt by the Indian government under Prime Minister Modi to divert its domestic attention from the pandemic, the social and economic strife that is being seen. Do you, now looking in hindsight, your paper came in 2020, now it is 2022. Do you think these factors still hold true, or do you think we are beyond those factors now?
Although 2 years passed, I still believe that what my argument in my article is still hot waters, because that our bilateral relation is still not on the right track. I can say so. The diplomatic behavior, thinkings, perspectives from New Delhi toward Beijing hasn't been dramatically or visibly changed. Although we have just carrying forward our foreign minister visit, but it is often said that old habit dies hard, although it is not so old. One of the principles, or one of the reasons contributing to the current situation in the bilateral relation is that New Delhi's position on the border issues have been really becoming quite different comparing to their position in the past 30 years. It is very outstanding. The difference is that ever since the Modi is taking office, then this administration had gradually tend to regard that without addressing the border issues, the bilateral relations cannot be continually like this on a normal track. So with this kind of changing, then the border issues, the disturbance from border issues become more and more damaging. While we're talking about the border issues, we cannot solve it in the near future. It's so complicated. It still need patience. And also the border issues is so politically sensitive because it is closely related to sovereignty issues, related to the nationalism feelings. So if we persist on this kind of precondition of normalization of bilateral relations, then it means that it still takes some more time for these bilateral relations to be normalized, since the border issues is still standing on the way of this kind of modernization. If we change this kind of mindset, or going back to what New Delhi had hold from 1989 to 2017, for example, that is that border issue is one problem, one issue of the bilateral relations. On the one side, we still engage with each other, try to find a mutual acceptable way to address this. On the other side, develop our bilateral relations in all the other areas. Even if only then these relations can be becoming more and more stable. But from the visit of our Foreign Minister and State Councillor Wang Yi's visit, from their discussions, we still find that this kind of position hasn't been changed yet.
Let me get back to the issue that you just said, that the border crisis, recent border crisis, has now been on for nearly 23 months. 15 rounds of talks between senior military commanders have taken place. Diplomatic talks have taken place. 7 or 8 rounds of diplomatic talks have taken place. And India has very clearly said that the border issue is central to the bilateral relationship, to bilateral ties. How can the crisis on the borders be resolved? What is the answer? What is the solution that somebody like you, who knows the issue so well, would propose?
But anyway, although we said that the border issues is ticklish, need time to find a final settlement, but still, I'm very glad to find that we are marching on the right direction. Although we have conflicts 2 years back, but we carry forward dialogues, positive, constructive engagements, like the corps level military dialogue or negotiations. We are marching in the right direction, but it's still taking more patience. From the past 15 rounds of corps commanders level talks, you can see that we are gradually marching forward, like that we already has de-engaged in several hotspots, like the hot spring, like the Bengal Lake, like the Galvan Valley, like the PP15, patrolling point. We're gradually reducing this kind of conflicting hotspots. Then we are moving forward inch by inch. So what I mean that carrying forward this kind of efforts, finally, we may reducing all these hotspots which had been disturbing our bilateral relations in the past so many years. So I'm quite positive and about this future development. Now, during this process, my personal view is that we still want to expecting that there will be less media hype, more strategic patience, and less stirring up the nationalist feelings, and also put the border issue still at the right position of the bilateral relations, so that we can create a more conducive environment for both sides mechanisms to find their ways to try to reaching the permanent settlement. My personal judgment is that after some more rounds of this kind of engagement, we will came to a certain situation that all the gray areas, all the hotspots which can entail physical conflicts will be reduced to none. Even by then, we couldn't ink some border agreements or treaties. It doesn't matter, because we're having a certain kind of disengagement buffer zone. That is to say, a kind of, even we can label it a kind of bottom line or red line. Then the whole region across the border frontiers then could become peaceful and stable. Then we will reducing the disturbance of the border issues to the bilateral relations.
No, who that's very hopeful of you to believe that there would be a buffer zone all along the line of actual control on the border, and both sides will agree to it. But as we saw, the previous agreements did not hold. But I share your hope, and I hope that things are peaceful between India and China. Coming back to the other point that you raised about State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to New Delhi, how do you now, more than 10 days have passed, how, when we are talking, what were the reasons, to your mind, State Councillor Wang Yi decided to visit New Delhi? And how do you look at the visit? How successful was his visit to India?
I think this visit is very significant, very timely, because we are facing more uncertainties in the global political situation, especially after the Russian-Ukraine crisis. Both of our countries or economies are facing new challenges, which without bilateral communications, discussions, we could facing more challenges or disturbances. So I think that during the visit, I also found that the both sides has discussing the how to addressing this new developments, how to how can I say find some ways addressing like the price stability of energy or some other strategic significant commodities or goods, how to stabilizing the energy supplement, how to guarantee the safety of the payment system, how to addressing a new round of major powers strategic interactions. I think these are all closely related to the future international political scenarios development. So I think it is timely, this visit. We're also expecting that Indian Foreign Minister will visit Beijing sometime to further discussing how those two countries jointly, coordinatedly addressing this new kind of changes. If we lack this kind of strategic dialogue, I think that both sides will suffer from the new developments. Especially that the whole world, international community is marching toward a post-COVID-19 period. So how to addressing the economic recovery heavily disturbed by this pandemic is also need our two governments to discuss, to exchange views. Since that we are the two largest emerging economies. If we can coordinate our policies, positions, it means that there will be bigger hope of the recovery of global economy.
I hear you, and I know what you're saying is a view that has been expressed by Beijing and by other Chinese scholars. But as you know, India's view is that the border crisis still continues. There are a large number of soldiers which are deployed from both sides on the border. How can we move towards normalcy when border still remains tense? How will you balance this concern from India's concern, New Delhi's concern, with what you just said?
You see that concern across the border is more purposely being exaggerated. While the concern from the development out of Russia and Ukraine crisis is more and more real, we're feeling the pressure. So when you balancing these two kinds of concern, one is border related, one is the earth-changing global orders. So which one is more concerning us. I think the latter, the global orders change, the global situation, global political structure, strategic pictures change, will have more direct and more destructive or even disastrous impact upon both of us. So while talking about the border issue, I don't think that we will enter another round of military conflicts. It is totally unimaginable. But it is because I mentioned, because it is closely related to sovereignty issues, closely related to the political sensitive issues. Can easily be exaggerated. According to the Chinese government's practice, that less media coverage, less media hype, let the professionals deal with these ticklish issues, reducing the noisy, reducing unnecessary noises. Let them do it. Take some time, do it. It doesn't mean that we have to neglect it, totally put on shelf. No, let the professionals find the ways to address it. Then let the strategic thinking circles, let the decision-making top-level leaders to discuss a much more bigger issues, that which will really have lasting, heavier impact upon our futures rising into global powers.
Who that sounds good, but as you know, it is not easy to do so in the Indian context. You know India well. You have been to India so many times. India, at the end of the day, Indian people will talk about it and will not completely put it on the back burner, and that seems to be the government's line as well. But moving on, when State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited South Asia, he also visited Pakistan. He also visited Nepal. He visited Afghanistan during the same visit. And as you know, there has been a lot of discussion about this competition between India and China in the countries of South Asia. Recently Beijing and Kathmandu have had tensions, and things are really bad in Sri Lanka right now, as you know, with its economy. So what are these regional issues between India and China, and are they going to become worse in the future? Are you hopeful about these India and China having a better relationship in this region?
Since that South Asia is a common neighboring regions of both of our countries. So with the rising of our two economies, with the rising and increasement of our respective comprehensive national strengths, then the influence and the visible presence will become more and more tangible. Then, if without bilateral discussions, or if without some regional platforms to take up this kind of issues, then the mutual suspicions will remain larger and larger, and then finally affect our bilateral relations. I can say now the regional competition for influence has become a core contradictions or core issue between us. This issue, of course, is much developed from the third-party factor to our bilateral relations. Now, even including the Americans' aggressive involvement to make the issue become more and more complicated. So for China, we have some concern, but more concern is not from India. More concern is from the US. So what kind of US role will play in China's neighboring regions? We have the reasons for that. We know that China, the stability of Tibet, stability of Xinjiang, closely related to the situation developed in South Asia. While we know that the US now making that the Sino-US relation as the most biggest challenges they are facing. The top one challenges, strategic rivalry regarded by the US. So in this regard, we have 100% every reason to suspect the American motives. And what added the China's concern even more is that we know without support, without cooperation, without understanding from New Delhi, I don't think the US can play a much bigger role in its relations building up with some smaller Asian countries, like with Nepal, with Bangladesh, with Maldives, with Sri Lanka. In the past, because of India's resistance or reluctance, the US can be found it very difficult to develop bilateral relations with this neighboring country, especially in terms of security. But now we see that to the Chinese apprehension that because of India's coordination, support, even how can I say cooperation anyway. So we can see the MCC make physical standing or physical infiltration into Nepal. And also we see that the US has inked security cooperation with Maldives. Even the US want to include all the South Asian countries into the Asian, the Indian Pacific strategy. And I don't know. So this is really alarming to China, because we know that frontier region stability development closely related to South Asia. China's energy security closely related to the threats crossing the Indian Ocean. So that is the China's concern. So this is the background. This will furtherly increase China's strategic suspicion upon or against India, whether India and the US are cooperated, are joining hands with hands, want to expel totally the China's influence from South Asia, where has been regarded by Beijing as her neighbors.
Let me put it very straight then. How big a factor is the US, the United States, in China-India ties? Or are these fears overblown about the US presence and India cooperating with the US, as you said, in smaller South Asian countries? Clearly, India is not only working at the behest of the US, as we have seen after the position that New Delhi has taken on the Ukraine issue. It has not voted in favor of the United States in any of the resolutions. So do you really think that the US is that big a factor in China-India ties, or are we overblowing this, the Chinese concerns about the US?
No, I think the concern is real. Is real or physically solid. That is no question no reason to question it, because this serves the national interest. What is the national interest in Washington D.C.? Of course, containing China or disturbing the rising process of China, and this strategic purpose objectives have been shared by New Delhi, because it is also serving the New Delhi's national interest that slowing down the developmental process of China, or through the cooperation with US, India can speed up its economic development, so that even in the future to overpass China, at least in terms of economic development. So they serve their respective purposes. And also, India, because of the historical reasons, geopolitical reasons, geostrategic reasons, New Delhi has some certain level of strategic suspicions against Beijing. So on this aspect, in this aspect, that Washington D.C. and New Delhi have common strategic commonalities. So that is not strange that they have some cooperations. Talking about the Ukraine issue, my view is that the New Delhi's policy on this regard doesn't mean that the New Delhi want to coordinate its positions with China, or for some reasons want to normalize in the bilateral relations with China. It has nothing to do with the China, the bilateral relations. It is still closely related to national interests of New Delhi, because we know that New Delhi has so close relations with Russia, not only militarily, but also in some other commodities like fertilizers. We know that this kind of interdependence is very deep, and also New Delhi do not want to lose the strategic balance among major powers. Like Beijing, that New Delhi do not want to see a much cornered, much weaker Russia in the international political arena, or in the international power structure. Then it means that New Delhi the relations with US will become lopsided, because we know that in the past 2 years, New Delhi has practiced a certain kind of policy like decoupling with China, or even disrupt the supply chain, value chain, or production chain with China. If in the future, New Delhi's relation with Moscow also disrupted, then New Delhi has to heavily depend upon Washington D.C., which is not serving the national interests of New Delhi. So what I want to express is that it is based on the calculation of national interests. It's not based on the calculation of how to find common grounds with Beijing. It has less to do with that.
Oh, that's definitely true that India's policy on Ukraine or dealing with Washington is based on its own national interest and not dictated that because it wants to be close to China. But the way you put it, the way you say that India and New Delhi and Washington are, strategically aligned to stop the rise of China, that makes it sound like that there are structural issues which will mean that India and China cannot work together. Are you trying to say that?
No, I just want to see this kind of commonalities out of the concern about the future development of China has become a kind of glue or driving forces for New Delhi and Washington D.C. coming together. It is a reality that Washington D.C. want to ally with New Delhi so they can jointly check China. That is their purpose. That is their public purpose. That is quite clear from the different strategic reports or documents. Very clear. But it is another thing that whether New Delhi will join the bandwagon of US in containing China totally in all aspects, wholeheartedly, that is a different issue. I think the major driving forces for New Delhi to embrace the Indo-Pacific strategy is that want to take advantage of this, take advantage of the competitions on the even strategic rivalry between China and the US to speeding up Indians herself rising into global powers. Like that, the reshape or restructuring of the supply chains, production chains, like the decoupling of the technical cooperation between China and the US. New Delhi regarded as a golden chance, golden strategic opportunity, have to grasp so that make itself to be put in a more rapid developmental track. This no, this is a very how can I say reasonable for New Delhi to practice in this kind of policies. In the past, China also had taken this kind of opportunities for its own economic development. If the precondition is that New Delhi will not join some military alliance arrangement like AUKUS, this kind of arrangement. Because any of this kind of military allies alliance, of course, they have to have very clear enemy. If India regard China as an enemy, then they will really causing the bilateral relations.
Yeah, India does not look at China as an enemy. I don't think India has ever used that term historically, or I have not even seen the current government, even in the worst of times, whether it was during the Doklam crisis or during the Ladakh crisis, say that China is an enemy. That has never been the phrasing on India's part. But I understand what you're trying to say. Who Beijing has been very angry about the Quad, calling it an Asian NATO, and saying all kinds of things about it. Can India be realistically a part of the Quad and still be friendly with China? And I say this knowing fully well that Quad is not a military grouping; it's a non-military grouping. Can it still be friendly with China in that case?
Before the formation of AUKUS, this could be very difficult for India to ride on a tight rope between Quad and China. But now, since the Indo-Pacific strategy has a military alliance or club named AUKUS, the Quad may focus much more on economic cooperation, on production chain cooperation, or they call it the flexible supply chain cooperation. Then they were reducing the tension between China and India, or make Quad more or less a little soft. So in this regard, we can say that it is possible for India to be one part of Quad and at the same time to be friendly with China.
My final question, what does the future of China-India ties look like to you? Will it be collaboration? Will it be competition? Will it be conflict? Are there any signs of hope in your mind? Or are we looking at every year going to be this bad as 2020, 2021 and 2022 seem to be?
My personal view is that what happened 2 years before, the government tragedy, I don't think it will repeat in the future again. And on the border issue, in the frontier regions, I personally expecting more and more peaceful and stable in the coming days. That is to say that the biggest disturbance to the bilateral relations had gradually been put aside. So that is to say, in the future, conflicts, especially military conflicts, can be totally excluded in our bilateral relations. Then, cooperation, competition, both, if it is based on rules. Cooperations, of course, personally, I would like to say that cooperation should be the mainstream. But sometimes, especially the major powers like China, India, who have so many differences, which is also very normal for major power like both of us. We would like to see even if it is competition, based on rules, in a healthier competition, not in a vicious circle competition. So my final judgment on prediction is that in the future, cooperation, competition could both be the parts of the bilateral relations in the future, but both could be, how can I say, not. Well, I put it in this way that although there is competition in the future, that kind of competition will not lead to the conflicts or confrontation between our two economies. This kind of competition between two major powers is natural. It's a natural part. It's one part of our bilateral relations. That is to say, the future relations will be more and more like normal relations, mature relations between major powers.
I totally share your optimism, and I hope that there will be cooperation and competition between Beijing and New Delhi, and not confrontation or conflict. And before I end, who anything which you would like to say to your listeners in Hindi or Sanskrit? कुछ बोलना चाहेंगे आप हिंदी में या संस्कृत में?
संस्कृत तो अभी तो बोलने में सीखने में बहुत मुश्किल. हिंदी थोड़ा सा, बट लेकिन अभ्यास का मौका बहुत कम, इसलिए बोलने में भी मुश्किल.
पर आप बहुत अच्छी हिंदी बोलते हैं, and it was wonderful talking to you, who I really enjoyed this conversation of ours. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. For more information on our work, follow us on Twitter at CPR_India and log on to our website at www.cprindia.org.